Joining me now is our panel, Politico congressional reporter Daniella Diaz, Democratic strategist Ameshia and Republican strategist Rick Tyler. He's also an NBC political analyst. Thanks to all of you for being here. So, Daniella, let's start with this mess on Capitol Hill. What do you make of it? Does it get resolved, or is the government going to shut down, and are we going to see an impeachment inquiry?
It just depends who has the power right now, right? The Senate seems to be very united. McConnell and Schumer, we just heard from them, moments ago, saying they want to move forward to prevent a government shutdown. So really the player here that we're going to have all eyes on is next week, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, and how he's going to deal with the different factions of his party, who some want cuts to federal spending, some are okay with moving forward with a stopgap bill so that they can fund the government to pass these appropriations bills, prevent a shutdown. And, he really wants to stay speaker. And these conservatives continue to threaten, specifically Chip Roy. He had a Twitter X thread last night, continuing to say he wants to cut spending. So we're going to have to keep an eye on how this all plays out, because McCarthy is walking a very fine line here to please all factions of his party. But, they're not back yet this week. It's the Senate back. So that's who we're hearing from today.
Yeah, right. Kevin, Daniella makes the point that Speaker McCarthy is yet again in the spotlight. His speakership is yet again in the spotlight. Talk about how big of a test this is for him. And do you think that former President Trump is in his ear in this moment?
Probably. Look, McCarthy has to decide whether he wants to be the leader of the party and his House caucus, and more importantly, whether Republicans can prove they can govern. You can't get big tax cuts when you have small margins in the body. It just doesn't work that way. The way you get long-term systemic change is you convince enough of the country to send the people who want that kind of change to Congress. They didn't. It is split. The Congress has a responsibility to govern, and they're not governing. And when did a shutdown ever benefit the Republican Party? Like, ever? Because every time it gets shut down, no matter whose fault it is, it's always going to be blamed on the Republicans, and it's just going to show people that they're not ready to govern.
Ameshia, one thing that we saw earlier this year was that the White House underestimated McCarthy and his ability to actually get his conference to pass legislation. Do you think that the White House runs the risk of doing that again? And I was in the briefing room today, and I asked them, how involved is the president going to be? Do you expect him to get involved in this, given the stakes?
I do, given the stakes and the timeline. Remember, we're, fastly approaching an election year. There's also still the primary states that are out. Looking at Biden's current polling numbers, spoiler alert, they don't look that great. At this point, I think that he is going to get involved. A little bit more of a light hand. I don't think he's going to go and do a press circuit around it, but I do think that he's going to get involved because he quite frankly has to. The stakes are too high for the American public. We know that the interest rates are unattainable for many people. We know that there is going to be another housing crisis in tandem with student loan debt repayment. We know that there are a lot of people who literally can't keep their heads above water. They cannot afford to have a crisis of this. And acknowledging that, to a point you made earlier, there's no win here for Republicans to actually, push forward with a stall of that sort. But the American public would be the ones who are hurt the most. And that blame game is something this White House doesn't want. And quite frankly, I don't think it's something McCarthy wants either.
Daniella, what do you make of that?
Adding to what you just said, you nailed it. But we're already seeing the messaging from Democrats, and of course, Biden being the leader of the Democratic Party, that it is going to be Republicans' fault if there's a shutdown. Schumer has been saying it repeatedly. Hakeem Jeffries has been saying it repeatedly. And that is what we're going to hear from the rank and file, too. They are all united on this, and they all want to make sure the American people know, and that is obviously organized, that if there is a shutdown, it's because of the conservatives in the House.
One of the things that's interesting is that Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying, I'm not going to vote for this if we're not stripping funding for the investigations into former President Trump. I'm not going to support Ukraine funding. I mean, Rick, obviously a lot of this is aimed at energizing the base.
I hope not, but unfortunately it does seem that way. Yeah. Look, I don't like the politics of impeachment without evidence. If there's evidence, then let's look at an investigation. But we don't investigate because we think there might be evidence, and there's been an ongoing investigation, and there is no evidence. Similarly, I don't like the politics of the 14th Amendment. I think those things are very dangerous.
14th Amendment is a way essentially to keep former President Trump from getting on the ballot in certain states.
Because he was proven to be part of an insurrection. Well, Jack Smith didn't feel that way because he didn't charge him with anything related to an insurrection. They didn't do that in Georgia either. He's been charged with conspiracy. Those things are going to go nowhere. And I think in both cases, they will just strengthen each of the candidates. So,
Ameshia, it's such an interesting point because we saw when former President Trump was impeached twice, there's a political upside to that. And the White House is basically banking on, look, if this does happen, which, as you heard Monica say in her reporting at the top of the show, they're not convinced it's going to happen. But if it happens, they're going to be prepared, and they're going to be prepared to try to spin it around. And as Rick says, the politics are very tricky.
Absolutely. Well, the thing about impeachment is typically, and we've seen this with, we saw it with Clinton as well, when impeachment happens, the likelihood of the approval rating going down tremendously for the leader is actually very minimal. We would like to think that these things are really driving the American public. Quite frankly, they don't, not to the manner at which I think those who present them actually believe that they do. And at best, it could actually be a boost. And I think that that's one of the things that is feared here.
Yeah, it was a boost for Clinton, as well as former President Trump, Daniella.
That's true. I do want to add to what you said earlier about McCarthy. McCarthy knows that it's very tricky. He has not yet endorsed Trump. Let's remember that. He also wants to pass a continuing resolution. Yes, he wants to pass a CR. He doesn't want to shut down. He understands what that means politically for his party. He is really struggling right now. And of course, impeachment would start in the House, right? And it would have to be, and McCarthy has already said that if there is a sort of an impeachment effort, it will start in the House and it will be a vote. That is how it started with Democrats, and McCarthy has already said that that's what he plans to do as well. And that's where we don't know. Will it go forward? That we'll wait and see.
How much pressure do you think he's under from Republicans to go forward with this conference?
Immense pressure, Kristen. He wants to be speaker. That's all he's wanted. He has it right now. He's had it longer than even some people predicted, even after the debt limit fight. And it's important to note that he's struggling again with the conservatives. He has Marjorie Taylor Greene behind him. That's not a concern. I'm talking more about, the House Freedom Caucus member. She's not part of it anymore. Let's remember those really conservative Republicans, most of them supporting Trump, some of them are not, but still very, very conservative, who are threatening to oust him because of that motion to vacate. Only one member of Congress can vote to motion to vacate the speaker, and he knows that he's dealing with that. So he could obviously continue down this path where he pleases all the factions of his party, and he's done that before. It's just a matter of how is he going to do that this time.
Let's talk about another leader, President Biden, Ameshia, who had this very sharp shift in tone yesterday when he was in Philadelphia speaking to union members, talking about the former guy, as he said, quote unquote, who had this office. He took some of his sharpest attacks against former President Trump, frankly, that we've heard from President Biden in quite some time.
Absolutely. And quite frankly, I'm excited by it. I've been waiting for the fighting side of President Joe Biden to come out for a while now. This isn't an election cycle where you can have someone who only talks about the wins or the legislative wins or the policy wins that have been made by the Democratic Party. He is going to have to get in the wrestling match with former President Trump. The impeachments didn't matter. The 90-plus felony charges didn't matter. the mugshot didn't matter. He's going to have to call Trump out for who he is, for what he is, and set that contrast. And I think that he's finally reached the point in recognizing that these other things aren't necessarily working, so it's time to make that happen.
And Rick, he doesn't want to get into the legal battles that the former president is facing for a range of different reasons. Yeah. But as Ameshia points out, his messaging on the economy hasn't been breaking through. And here you have polls showing the two are tied. He's tied with former President Trump.
Yeah, which is really kind of scary. What President Biden, I think, is trying to do is what the Republican Party or the other candidates, save for Chris Christie, who's not going to be the nominee in all likelihood, and Asa Hutchinson similarly, is actually run against Donald Trump. And you can do that by pointing out his horrible record as president. Even from a conservative Republican perspective, he has a horrible record as president. What's ironic about the Republican Party is they don't want to take on Donald Trump, but they ought to soon realize that if Donald Trump is the nominee, I believe they will get wiped out up and down the ticket in November. And maybe that's the best thing, because this party needs to be wiped out to be reformed. because this is not a winning. Trump is not their winning ticket, and is not a strategy for a governing majority.
All right. Well, we will leave it there. Thank you. Great conversation, Daniella, Ameshia, and Rick. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.